This will be a day long remembered. Now I am the master.
Welcome to another episode of Legends and Theories, and welcome to the first video in this series, which is going to be an introduction to my Justice League versus Avengers series. This is going to be broken down into three other parts, and these three parts, we're looking at different groups. The first part is going to be the more minor and obscure characters. The second will be of the more major ones, and then the final one will be of the big superheroes, founding members, and other major names from these universes. I'll be looking at the DCAU and the Avengers. And specifically, the points I'll be looking at is the DCAU at the end of Justice League Unlimited, plus a few other members that weren't officially part of the Justice League, but were major enough in DCAU and active at this point in the timeline that I decided to include them. Meanwhile, on the Marvel side, it'll be everyone from the point before the final battle in Endgame. I'll be considering everyone that was brought back from the blip, but everyone's going to be at their default power level. So what I mean by that is characters who got a little bit of a boost from other stuff. For example, Captain America wielding Mjolnir, or either Hulk or Iron Man wielding the Infinity Gauntlet will not be considered. I'll be looking at them at their typical power. And for Thor, I'll look at him both with and without Stormbreaker. So I'll consider him with Mjolnir and Stormbreaker, but we'll ultimately go with the Stormbreaker results. Because although it would be interesting to look at, his default power at this time would have been with Stormbreaker. And although he does go back to Mjolnir, that is after the events of Endgame, so I might be considering that. And I'll also be considering their power levels at this point in the timeline. So characters who didn't manage to gain more power, like the Scarlet Witch, will not be getting that extra power. But also characters who became a lot weaker. For example, Batman at the furthest point we see him is barely alive. He has to take medicine, and he is completely incapable of fighting. That is in Justice League Unlimited's episode Epilogue. So I'm only considering them at this point to kind of even everything out and having people be either weaker or more powerful. I am bringing some members back for the Avengers that are dead at this point, mainly to keep things evened out, and originally I was going to have to bring back Supergirl and Captain Marvel or Shazam for the Justice League, but I realized that they would have no fair matchup because I wanted to do this by whoever would win the most rounds in a fight. Because I'll be fully honest with you, the Justice League would completely wipe out the floor with the Avengers. Like, there's no way the Avengers stand any chance against defeating the entirety of the Justice League for one simple reason, and that is Superman. There is nobody in the MCU, at least on the Avengers, that stands any chance to defeat Superman at all. Because originally I was going to have this be a series where it kept going down from the most fair matchup, then kept going down until we got an eventual winner. But I realized that Superman just automatically wins this because He fights at such a higher power level than anyone else in the MCU, and if we take a look at the four Avengers that I say had the best chance against him, they still really stand no shot at all. If we take a look at, on the weakest example, the Hulk, we clearly saw that Thanos was easily able to beat up the Hulk, and Superman would be able to do the same. If we take a look at Doctor Strange, although he does have the benefit of magic, which is one of Superman's weaknesses, I feel that's really not going to overcome the abilities of Superman, and Strange isn't a full-on master at this point. Although he is really good, Superman's just still is way too powerful for him. If we look at Thor, it really doesn't matter if he has Mjolnir or not, because if he does have Mjolnir, that actually makes things worse for him, since Superman is a person like Steve Rogers who would be able to lift the hammer. So if he picks up that hammer, he will be able to use the power of Thor against Thor. And going to Captain Marvel, I'm going to be brief on this one because this isn't the matchup I'm going to have since they have the closest power set. But at the simplest terms, she is powered by yellow sun energy, and that's what her attacks are based off of. And Superman absorbs yellow sun energy to make himself more powerful. I'll go more in depth with this in the third and final video of the matchups, so you can look for the full explanation there. But at the simplest terms, nobody stands even a chance against him. And the other fact is that no, they weren't able to beat Thanos in a fair fight. They had to use, for the first time, Thanos basically giving up and Thor executing him just out of nowhere. And the second time, they had to use the Infinity Gauntlet to wipe out him and his entire army. None of them really stood a good chance against Thanos in a fair fight. And Superman has fought Darkseid, who is way more powerful than Thanos, and before Darkseid was made even more powerful when he was brought back from the dead, Superman was able to defeat Darkseid in combat and completely humiliate him after Darkseid did the same to him. But Darkseid just came back even more powerful, and Superman was still able to last a good amount of time, although he was ultimately going to lose until he was saved by Lex Luthor, who got the anti-life equation. But being fully honest, that's the fact that Superman was able to last longer in a fight than anyone did against Thanos, and that Darkseid, in his base form before he got upgraded after his revival, would have been like Thanos fighting the Hulk, with Thanos being in the place of the Hulk and Darkseid being in the place of Thanos. So yeah, honestly, just no one stood a chance against him. And going to look at the poll I did, last time I checked it was 50-50, but checking it now it is still 50-50. And although I didn't take screenshots at the time, it was heavily in favor for the Justice League for the first few weeks. And the Avengers started to get a little more traction after a little bit of time, but honestly, I just don't think anybody from Endgame stands a chance. So looking at this series, once again, I'm going to be doing it by who wins the overall most fights, to say which is the ultimately better team. And since the teams are so massive, I am going to be discounting some of the characters that we really have no development on or never really seen. I'm also not considering the backup armies to the Avengers, being the Ravengers, Sorcerers, and just some other people that participated in the battle. And I think that's just, just make it simpler, and the fact that I don't need to bring in, just a bunch of random people because there was no army fighting with the Justice League, unless you count the Legion of Doom, which has some pretty big powerhouses in it, so I would have been thinking Army's gonna be doing too good against some of them, although their numbers were cut in half after the attempted coup in the previous episode. But still, honestly, this is a just really insane project I want to do, and as I said, I'm going to be cutting a few out. There was a bunch of people who are part of the Justice League, but we only saw in the background and never saw actually doing anything. So I'm just not considering them at all. But I am going to be, in general, just looking at the two teams and seeing how they do. And for the thing, there is going to be characters that sort of make it up to a higher level than maybe they deserve in terms of where the character is, because some of them are going to make it towards the more important ones, but that's because I'm doing it by people with the closest abilities, which basically means that, sometimes I'm going to be saying this is, extremely important founder members, but they'll be faced off against a more minor character. But I'm always going to be doing it by the more relevant character. For example, Quicksilver is a pretty minor character overall in the MCU, but if we are looking at who his closest in power is, and that is the Flash, and the Flash is not only a founding member of the Justice League, but also one of the most important characters in the DCAU, which puts him in the founder slash extremely important category. And this puts Quicksilver up in that one, even though on his own he wouldn't belong there. But that's just, a small example, and I'll be going through each of these battles in these three parts. It's gonna be honestly just a lot of fun to do. There was just so many different members to go through, and as I said, there are a few that I cut out, but there aren't too many. Those are ones that basically only appeared in the background during Justice League Unlimited that we have got absolutely no development for in this continuity. And yes, I said this continuity because, at least on screen, because I haven't read, too many of the comics, so they may have got some development there. But based on what we've seen just in the shows, Batman, the animated series, and, it's like two other renames, Superman, the animated series, Justice League, and Justice League Unlimited. And even if some of these background characters did get development in the comics that are kind of set around this continuity, I'm not super sure about how canon they are all considered. It still is just not going to be considered. I'm just going to be considering what we've seen on screen, and the same goes for the MCU. But let's go into the characters that are being brought in that either are dead or not technically members of the Justice League at this point in the timeline. And for the Justice League, I'm bringing in Static, Batgirl, and Nightwing. And to go through the reasons for them, I picked Static for the reason that he does work with the Justice League and eventually does join it, since he also has his own show that I'm also going to consider, but I really haven't watched it too much because I, completely forgot to put it in that list of shows I just went through. But Static is going to be considered as part of the Justice League just for this series, since he is so important. And then Batgirl and Nightwing to represent from Batman the Animated Series, since they weren't able to use any of those characters, since they were being used elsewhere in the shows The Batman and Teen Titans, because Warner Brothers has this stupid rule where they can't have multiple versions of certain characters existing at the same time in different shows or movies, so I'm just gonna bring them in since they're important. I didn't bring Robin, being Tim Drake, because I didn't feel like he didn't have anyone he'd really match up against to fight, and that's was really the main reason. I also didn't feel like, he was as important as the other two, who were with Batman for a lot longer, and I think definitely needed representation. For the Avengers, on the other hand, as I mentioned before, I am bringing Quicksilver back from the dead. I'm also bringing Black Widow and the Vision, and all three of them are dead, and they wanted to participate in this battle, but I'm going to be considering them and Gamora. I forgot about Gamora for a second, but it's gonna be more the Gamora from the alternate timeline. So it's not gonna be the Gamora from Guardians of the Galaxy. And yeah, honestly, I brought the three of them back mainly because they either have people they can match with power or they were really important. Since Black Widow was a founding Avenger, I just felt I had to bring her back. Vision had such a similar power set to Martian Manhunter. I also thought that I'd bring him back just to have a fair match for Martian Manhunter. And finally, I brought back Quicksilver for the same reason, because he is the only speedster at this point in the MCU, so he's the only person that will really be able to go up against the Flash. And yeah, honestly, this is it's really everything for the series to set it up. This took a little longer than I thought, but I'm excited to do this. I wanted to make sure I was clear with everything. And yeah, if you have any more questions about it, ask me in the comments. And once again, it's going to be based on whoever wins the most fights, and not based off of whoever is going to win the battle overall, because I think you could say, if you're looking at this from an unbiased perspective, the Justice League would totally dominate this fight for, as I explained before, the fact that Superman has fought people way more powerful than Thanos for a longer period, and no one in the MCU has been able to beat Thanos in a fair fight. But let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you next episode of Legends and Theories. Thank you for watching this episode of Legends and Theories. Please subscribe, like the video, share the video, leave a comment, check out the video on screen, and may the Force be with you.